On October 1st, 2015, the state of California will switch from ICD-9 to ICD-10 billing codes. Because of this change, San Francisco County mental health and substance abuse practitioners are switching from DSM-4 to DSM-5 classification codes. To prepare for this, San Francisco will be switching to DSM-5 early to help clinicians adjust to these changes. Because the DSM-5 no longer has axes, the diagnosis screen in Avatar has changed. The pre-display, which you will see if there are any other diagnoses entered for this episode, has not changed. From this screen, you can see any other diagnosis records that have been entered for this episode. If you want to edit an existing diagnosis entry, click Edit. To add a new diagnosis, click Add. First, select Admission, Discharge, Onset, or Update, whichever is appropriate. Then, select the time and date of your diagnosis, as you normally would. The next section is a multiple iteration table. For more information on using these, please see the related video. You will first need to create a new row to put a diagnosis in. Click New Row to do this. Scroll down to Diagnosis Search to begin searching for your diagnosis. You can search for DSM-4 or 5 codes, ICD-9 or 10 codes, or a description of the diagnosis. You will have to press Enter before any diagnoses appear. This is to prevent too many diagnoses from loading if you are not a fast typer. The DSM and ICD codes will appear to the right of the description. Hovering over a menu item will display the full description. Once you have found the diagnosis you wish to enter, double-click on it. The diagnosis screen will automatically map the ICD-9, ICD-10, DSM-4, DSM-5, and SNOMED codes under the cross-code mapping section. You should check to make sure this is the exact diagnosis that you are looking for. If this diagnosis is current, select Active. You should select Working, Rule Out, or Resolved, depending on the situation. Select Void when a diagnosis is incorrect, but you would still like to keep a record of the diagnosis. Enter the diagnosing practitioner here. Indicate whether the diagnosis is a primary, secondary, or tertiary under the ranking section. The bill order also indicates whether or not the diagnosis is primary, secondary, or tertiary. Make sure that your primary diagnosis has a bill order of 1. Check with your supervisor for other bill order rankings. The Present on Admission indicator dropdown lets you select whether or not the diagnosis was present at the time of admission. This is not required at all agencies, so check with your supervisor to see if you should be using this field. If you are entering a diagnosis before October 1st, the classification drop-down menu will say Axis 1, Axis 2, and Axis 3. After October 1st, the classification drop-down menu allows you to categorize each diagnosis as environmental, medical, mental health, or substance abuse. This menu will not change until after October 1st. The estimated onset date lets you enter the estimated date of the original occurrence of this diagnosis. If you select Resolved under the status, you can enter the resolved date below. Otherwise, this field is not active. To add another diagnosis, scroll back up to the Diagnoses section and click New Row. Follow the same procedure you did to enter this new diagnosis. To see more of the diagnosis description, click and drag the white vertical bar at the top of the search window to make that section longer. Make sure to add a ranking, bill order, and classification to each diagnosis that you add. For additional information such as trauma, general medical condition, and substance abuse CSI indicators, click on the Additional Diagnosis Information section. If you're at a mental health program, the Trauma, General Medical Condition Summary Code, and Substance Abuse/Dependent section are required for CSI input. If you are entering a diagnosis before October 1st, there will be an additional diagnosis page where you can enter the Axis IV diagnoses. This page will no longer appear after October 1st. If you want to bring in a diagnosis from a previous episode, you can do that using the menu labeled Select Episode to Default Diagnosis Information From. This will let you select the episode to bring in a diagnosis record from. Do note that bringing in diagnosis information from another episode will clear out what you have entered so far, so make sure to do this first. After selecting the episode, select the specific diagnosis entry to bring in from the menu below. There may be more than one entry, so use the diagnosis type and date of diagnosis to help make your selection. Once you have picked a diagnosis entry from this menu, it will appear in the table below. One last thing to note is that, unlike other multiple iteration tables, you can click directly on the table entry to make changes to certain fields. You can change the classification, estimated onset, and the resolve date this way. This video has covered the 2015 version of the diagnosis form. You can find this form by searching an avatar for Diagnosis as you normally would. Please note that this replaces the previous diagnosis form, which you will no longer be able to open.